Corey Atkins. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy and General Counsel for the Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for taking the time today to view the videos that you're about to watch. We have set these interviews up with each of the 5 Asheville City Council candidates for 2020. The Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization, and by doing these videos, we're in no way endorsing any of the candidates. These videos and interviews are specifically for educational and informational purposes only. The open-ended questions and statements that you'll see during the lightning round are informed by our AVL Grader plan. You can find more details about what this plan entails at www.avlgrader.org. Thank you again for viewing this interview, and we hope you find this content informative and useful as you look to vote on November 3rd. Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome to our 2020 edition of Asheville City Council candidate interviews. I'm Corey Atkins, Vice President of Public Policy with the Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce. Today we're joined by Rich Lee. Rich Lee is one of our candidates here for Asheville City Council. Rich, thanks for being here.
Good to be here. It was nice to see you, Corey.
Yeah, you too, as always. I'm going to jump right in. Our first question is concerning growth. Throughout the Asheville Grader visioning and strategic planning process, it really taught us a lot about Asheville and our entire Western North Carolina region and what we're facing over the next 20 years. For instance, by 2040, we're going to add about 150,000 new people to our area. So what is your plan as a city council member, and what is your vision for how the city, really the epicenter of that growth, how will you manage that growth?
Well, you know, I feel like I've been saying this for a few years, but I do feel like, one, there's not a really sensible or legal way for us to prevent this growth from happening. And what we're actually seeing is that climate change and climate migration is increasing the speed that people are moving here as one of the last refuges that in America that's not on fire and flooding. What I'm looking for is ways that we can, first of all, help protect our quality of life. And that means everything from the infrastructure that gets us around town and brings us our water and electricity and services, and then how we can make it so that the benefits of the growth and the effects of the growth are shared among more of the population. The first part of that is having something that the city has been contemplating for a number of years, but still hasn't acted on, and that is a major look at how we zone and plan our neighborhoods, our city centers, and our major corridors with a complete overhaul of the UDO. That's the Unified Development Ordinance. That's the set of codes that determines what can be built and where in the city of Asheville. That's way, way overdue for happening, more than 20 years old at this point. So you talk about the growth in this area, we're still operating under a zoning code that was last written in 1997, 23 years ago, when the population of the city and the county was that much smaller than they are now. So I do think we could handle that growth without feeling like a big, crowded, unpleasant place to live, as long as we start to get ahead of it with serious planning. The second part of it, as I mentioned, is making sure the prosperity of the region is shared around. I think a lot of the social conflict and a lot of the dissatisfaction in life comes, and opposition to things like hotels and the tourism industry, comes from a feeling that only a few parties are really benefiting in the city, while many people are just struggling to keep a toehold here or falling behind. And I was pleased to see, as I was looking through your plan, that shared prosperity is the language that the chamber actually uses for this section. That's about diversifying our economy, creating jobs across different sectors. So my kids who want to be zoologists and historians and archaeologists and inventors have careers that can take them out of college or high school here and take them through the rest of their lives, living a comfortable existence in the city, and that making sure that we're more resilient to things like, again, climate change, pandemics, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned economic development, so you hit on one of the points I was going to follow up with, but let's move to the second portion of that plan, intergenerational leadership. How do you see yourself, if you were to be elected, in the position of a city council member, and how do you think that you can help mold and influence the next generation of leaders in Asheville that will inherit this region in which you're going to be directly making policy?
Well, I think one of the first things to acknowledge about that is that I think on the city level and county level, intergenerational leadership is beginning to happen on its own, and it's not necessarily something that needs to be imposed from a top down. When you look at the Black Lives Matter protests that have been happening downtown and movements around creating a more sustainable economy here, a lot of those have leadership that runs all the way from young activists who are still in high school and college all the way up to retirees on their own. I think for my own part, one thing that I bring here that I feel really strongly is the perspective as somebody who first moved to Asheville when I was 17 years old, okay? So that's more than half my life ago. I'm 40 now, and I still carry with me, you know, we were just talking about how I'm moving in East Asheville, and I still carry with me the memory of the house I paid rent on when, you know, in West Asheville when I first moved here, and the kind of jobs that were available to me. And one thing I feel really strongly when we talk about diversifying the economy is I'm not aware of how the person who moves here now who's 17 years old or in their 20s or in their 30s and is not already pretty well established in a career that already has a place here in the city is going to be able to even have the experience that I have. So I want to make sure that the interests of younger people and are represented here in the city. As somebody who spends a lot of my time working on financial planning with people who are the whole range of ages, I want to make sure that retirees can afford to age in place here in the city and everybody in between. And so that's something I bring a lot of personal experience on and I want to foster. How do you do that? Programs like CALA, which is run by the city of Asheville, which fosters and gives scholarships to youth in Asheville High School, supporting community programs like My Daddy Taught Me That, and workforce training programs like Green Opportunities, where I used to volunteer a lot, are ways to do that. And the city can take a bigger part in that.
Yeah, and that really gets into the next point and next part of our plan, which I know you've looked over, really economic mobility. So, you know, of course, cities' resources are limited, but what are your plans to help impact the quality of life for our youngest residents? And how do you see jobs, economic growth specifically, being a major factor in that improvement? And if you don't, what do you think is the most impactful?
Yeah, so you're probably aware, but the people watching this may not be, that Buncombe County has some of the lowest economic mobility for people who are born here of any county in the Western North Carolina. And that's a real major problem. It's a problem that carries a lot of aspects that have to do with racial justice and with the city's past policy of disinvesting in neighborhoods that are historically non-white, and with disinvesting in public housing, clustering poverty within public housing, and with the growing achievement gap in schools that hasn't been addressed. And so I think one of the first things I would like to do if I were elected to city council is move our city school board from an appointed school board right now to an elected school board. And I don't think that's a panacea or cure-all for the problem there, but I think it's a way to start to have more public accountability for policies carried out by the city school board. And, you know, the city doesn't like to highlight this fact, but the city also controls a lot of what goes into the city schools as far as the supplemental programs that are paid for by the Asheville City Schools tax and how those are allocated. And that gives us leverage to make sure that we're providing enrichment programs, that we're funding programs that keep that lower the dropout rate and keep more people graduating and moving on into workforce training at AB Tech or our local colleges. And I think that's where economic mobility starts there. At the end of the day, you have to have the jobs, and the jobs have to be across a broader sector of the economy. And so when we talk about diversifying the economy away from tourism, tourism's only right now about 14% of our local workforce. It's not a majority, but it's pressuring the market towards lower wage jobs, jobs with a lower career potential, jobs with less advancement and future raise potential that can keep you in the middle class. If you go back to the Asheville of 30, 40, 50 years ago, a lot of folks would have worked at Square D or Gerber or the rail yard, and it would have offered them a track that could have kept pace with the cost of living, afforded you a house that you could build equity in, and carried you from school to retirement in a certain level or advancing, and we've lost a lot of that in Asheville, and we have to bring it back.
Yeah, and investing and continuing to invest in those job programs and organizations that are devoted to bringing in those jobs, I think is a very key to that. We talked about a place for all people. That's the fourth concept in our AVL Greater Plan. We've kind of went over this already, but real quickly, 2 or 3 major elements that you think you can directly influence as a city council member and people's lives that will continue the much needed work that we have here of lifting up every corner of our community, not just the ones who are already doing well in our economy.
So, I guess the first thing I answer to that is I want to make sure that every section and every neighborhood of Asheville has representation in city government and has the feeling that somebody's listening to them and looking out for their needs, and that Asheville policy is not set by necessarily like, a small or, like the usual people who have access to their city leadership. I'm an East Asheville resident right now, and East Asheville hasn't had a city council member in more than 5 years since the last one stepped down. Right now, South Asheville doesn't have a representative, and South Asheville has its own, shares a lot of concerns with the city of Asheville, but has its own set of concerns as far as managing transportation projects down there, making sure city services and dollars are allocated evenly to all the neighborhoods. I came up into this role or this candidacy as a guy who focused on neighborhood level issues, and that's something that I still bring to this. The other big part of making sure that Asheville is still a place for everybody is that is the racial equity part. And that's something that we're hearing more about over this last 2 or 3 months, thanks to the people that are organizing and making public demonstrations downtown that are for the most part peaceful. But it's been building for a long time. And if you go back to 1997, when I first moved to Asheville, Asheville actually had probably 1,000 or 2,000 more Black residents at that point than it has now. So as everything else has boomed in Asheville, as everything has started to grow here, we're literally bleeding off our racial diversity, and that's a diversity of character, of input and culture that we can't easily replace. So one of my commitments as a city council member is going to be to see through the city's racial and equity and inclusion measures that it's already put in place, to strengthen the equity and inclusion department that was already established in the city of Asheville, or to reformat it in a way that is more continually present in decision making, but also to carry out the reparations resolution that City Council passed in July, which very seriously asks City Council and very directly asks City Council to begin to address the economic and cultural impacts of redlining, of urban renewal, the demolition of East End Valley Street to create a bunch of city properties and eminent domaining of established Black neighborhoods and businesses that if you look at the economics that set Asheville's Black community on a different track and set them back compared to Asheville's white community with multi-generational effects. So City Council has already signed on to see that through. I think there are ways to make it happen in a way that are sensible to our budget, that are fair, and begin to repair that damage. And that's something that I'm committed to do as a City Council member.
Okay. And here's the last open-ended question. Then we're going to go through the lightning round, Rich. There's been lots of discussion recently, of course, around reimagining our public safety efforts, or quote unquote defunding the police. What is your stance on this topic, and what specific items would you change in our police budget, or how those resources are allocated?
Okay, that's a good question. So as I'm looking out my window here, I'm on Ashland Avenue, which is in the south side of Asheville. There's a lot of there's a high concentration of people that are houseless here, or dealing with addiction and other problems. And I guess the first perspective I take from that is responding to what we call like crimes of homelessness or nonviolent issues, the kind of social work issues right now comprise the bulk of the work of Asheville Police Department. I think AVL Watchdog, which is a new journalism organization here, found that actually violent crimes constitute less than 1%, just 1/3 of 1% of calls to APD, and things like responding to noise complaints, responding to minor trespassing of homeless people and such like that comprise the bulk of that. So the perspective I take on reforming or defunding and reinvesting from the Asheville Police Department to other community services mostly has to do with how can we safely transition some of that that work that right now is done by armed responders who are trained in many ways to respond to interactions with the public as potential threats and dangers, where a misunderstanding or an unwarranted escalation, somebody having a mental health crisis or something like that, has the potential to turn violent on either side. And how do we move some of that work to organizations or parties that are not armed, that bring the appropriate resources and training to that? And so one of the things I'm very interested to look at is, Asheville's growing homeless population has, like I said, it is responsible for a lot of police work and a lot of repeated calls for things that are not necessarily, public safety issues or crimes, sleeping on a patch of grass in a park or something like that. If we could reinvest dollars that are now spent on enforcing against houseless people into housing programs and community and addiction treatment programs and community support programs that remove those people from the houseless population, get them housed safely in a housing first program, could we not actually come out with a net improvement in public safety here in the city and free up police resources for more things like violent crime and for investigating what I'd call legit crime, and maybe save ourselves some budget dollars in the process? And if we take that approach to it, I don't see how any resident of the city could say, no, that's not something I want. So that's going to be a long process, but that's something that I think with good management and with a willingness to kind of take every part of the community and the resources and research and best practices into it, I think we could see through a lot of what we're hearing in public demands right now.
Okay, so here comes the lightning round, Rich. Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to read off 5 statements. They're all relevant to current affairs or something that maybe we haven't initially talked about during our conversation. And I just want you to give me an agree or disagree. These are not open-ended, so do your best. I know that's difficult sometimes to just say some of these issues aren't that cut and dry, but I will give you a chance at the end to give your elevator pitch and explain maybe some of these points that you might be talking about anyway. All right, sound good?
Okay. I say agree, but I shake my head at the same time. Okay. We can get some finer gradations in there.
Okay. All right. First statement.
Let's do it.
The city should continue to invest in the Economic Development Coalition.
Agree.
The city should prioritize its budget to ensure essential services first.
Agree.
The city should fund more nonprofits engaged in social justice work, even if it means raising taxes.
Agree.
The city should prohibit any further hotel development going forward.
Disagree.
The city should redirect resources to assist small businesses during COVID.
Agree.
All right. You survived the lightning round. Congratulations. Well, Rich, thanks for your time here today. I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds to a minute to give your elevator speech about why people should vote for you for Asheville City Council. Go for it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate having this opportunity to talk about a lot of the things that are really important to me, especially about the economic growth and life of the community and how that feeds into the our diversity, our well-being as a community, the sense of being the place that we all either grew up in or moved to and loved. The one thing I haven't been able to emphasize that I think is important as you make this decision is you're going to hear a lot of the same of this. The 5 candidates that are running right now have a lot of these same perspectives, and we're going to answer a lot of these questions the same way. What I bring to this that is particular is experience in the economic aspect of it, and experience as experience carrying city initiatives that have touched all of our lives, like sidewalks, roads, bus system, housing policy, and carrying that through this particular bureaucracy, which is difficult to do. So Asheville has a very good policy or a very good history of electing well-intentioned people, and I don't think that's going to be an exception this time. But I think this particular time, as we're struggling with the economic fallout of the pandemic and the recession, and so many issues that are coming in front of the city all at once, I think that experience matters, and a willingness to take these sort of overall wishes, the progressive principles of the city, and move them through sensibly through the process into practice. And that's what I'm offering to the city of Asheville, to be the manager that gets the ball across the line. Thank you all. And if you need more information, please check out my website, which will be linked on this video.
Rich Lee, thank you so much for your time today, and good luck with your campaign.
Thank you all. Take care and have a good day. Thanks.